Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about navigating the difficult relationship. From simple disagreements to emotionally abusive behaviors, you deserve respect and kindness. All the information on this show is meant for educational purposes only. Always seek a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Welcome to the show. My name is Paul, as it said in the intro, and I'm glad that you're here. And I'm also not glad that you're here because if you're listening to this, it's probably not something that you really want to deal with in your life. Trying to figure out what's difficult about your relationship, trying to figure out how to get through a normal or trying to have a normal conversation with somebody that you care about and they say they care about you, but it's difficult. There are difficulties. And so that's why we talk about this stuff here at Love and Abuse. And let me get right to this message. This person wrote and said, my boyfriend broke up with me and ultimately said I'm too emotional and therefore not compatible with him. He didn't take responsibility for anything and made me feel like the demise of our relationship was all my fault. It's been months and I can't get over him. I'm anxious. I can't stop ruminating. I can't stop thinking about what I should or shouldn't have done in so many scenarios. And he's already found somebody new. Does he even hurt over me? Does he ever think about me? I tried so hard. I love him so much. How could he just move on so easily? For those of us that have been victims of emotional abuse and get left, does the abuser miss us? Do they think about us? Do they care that we're not in their life anymore? And how can they discard us and move on so easily? I don't know how to cope with any of it. It's unfair. And I can't help thinking that maybe I deserve this and I truly am too emotional. Isn't the fact that I can't move on after all this time some proof that I'm too emotional? Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry you're going through this. And so I have to dispel some things that you said here. First of all, if you're struggling, it's because you're sad. You have a right to be sad. Somebody breaks up with you, it hurts. I've been through it many times, unfortunately, but it hurts. It sucks. And here's what happens. When you go through a breakup, it can feel like a part of you has died. And unless you start working on filling that part again, start working on your healing and rebuilding that part of you, that part can feel dead for a while. It can feel lost. It feels like there's a void there because it wasn't just you in the relationship and it wasn't just them. It was both of you. And so what you end up with are three entities of the relationship, you, them, and us. And because you had us, that's a part of your identity. So a part of your identity disappears because you relate to yourself as us when you had them in your life. And when they leave, when they are gone, when they die, when they disappear from your life, a part of you is missing. A part of you does feel dead or can feel dead. And so that hurts. And you need to grieve. You need to feel it. And that is a normal thing. The grieving at the end of a relationship is a perfectly normal thing. And it's really up to you to make sure that not only do you grieve, but you also start doing self-fulfilling things. You do self-care. You don't just stay home and wait for the phone call. You don't just look on social media and become obsessive about where they are and what they're doing. You start doing things for you. And that's how you start to heal. But it can take a while. It can. So I'm sorry you're going through that, the person who wrote. And it's going to take some time. Now, the second part of this is even more important. You are stuck in a rut, in sort of like what I would call a lack of closure. You don't have the closure you want. You don't have the answers to the questions. And then you're making up more questions. What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? These are all unanswerable if the person doesn't want to talk to you, but they're usually unanswerable, especially when you've been in any type of abusive relationship or toxic relationship, because you have to remember that a dysfunctional, toxic, or emotionally abusive person is in it to get their needs met, regardless of how you feel about it. That means when you're in a relationship with somebody like that, what they're trying to do is get their needs met, regardless of what anybody else feels. It is a self-serving process. They are being selfish. They want to take care of themselves. And yes, if you are at all affected by that, it's because you may not see your own worth, or at least as worthy as you are. You may not see or believe how wonderful you are, or how amazing you are, or how lovable, and how much you deserve a good relationship with a good person. That's what happens when we grow up not receiving enough support and reminders of our worth so that we can build a strong self-esteem. When you don't have that fully in yourself about yourself, then somebody can come along and make you feel like total crap. Somebody can make you feel worthless. And the truth is, nobody's worthless. We all have value. We all have worth. We have to recognize it in ourselves, because sometimes people aren't going to show us, especially if we grew up in a dysfunctional household or we got into a dysfunctional relationship. Those people aren't really capable of showing us our worth. And so there are people out there that are out there to convince us that we are not worthy. And they are ready to just dismiss us and invalidate us and not make us feel like we deserve to feel. We deserve to be in a loving, kind, supportive, generous relationship with somebody else. You deserve that. So I'm just putting that out there because that's a fact. There's no doubt about that. But you can't look for your worth from somebody else who's incapable of giving it. They can't do it. They don't know how, because they're still trying to fulfill themselves in a way that pleases their own wants and needs, that satisfies their own dysfunctions, that satisfies their own selfishness. And when they are focused on themselves, yeah, you'll get dismissed, and it will hurt, because you will invest all of you, or at least most of you, in a relationship, and they won't invest back. Everything this person wrote in here is somebody who's been dismissive and invalidating and insensitive to this person's sensitivities. That doesn't mean you're overly sensitive. It doesn't mean you're an emotional wreck. It doesn't mean you're too emotional. We're all emotional. I'm emotional every time I see a commercial that makes me cry. Some weird commercial that comes on and now I have to hold back the tears. That's so sweet. Or that's so loving and dear. And how do I handle this? I'm just so emotional. What do I do with it? Nothing. That's who you are. And it's wonderful. That's a wonderful person to be. Because when you're emotional, you're connected to your heart. You're connected to that deep place inside of you that some other people aren't. They have this wall around their heart and they dismiss others and they invalidate others, like this person that you were with. He doesn't connect with his heart. So he sees other people that are, quote, too emotional as a threat to his own safety and security. And believe me, I'm not making excuses for this person. I'm trying to outline that there are some people incapable of sharing with you in an emotional space and being with you in that vulnerable place that is required to connect at a deeper level. Somebody who wants you to be happy, who wants to see you smile, that's somebody who also will be in that vulnerable place with you. They're not going to put you down. They're not going to blame you for all the problems in the relationship. They want to see you happy. Somebody who loves you wants to see you smile, wants you to be emotional, wants you to feel connected to yourself, to them. They want you to feel loved, and they want you to know that they love you. That's normal, healthy relationship stuff. That should be at the top of the list. So when you're with somebody who, for example, this person doesn't take accountability, blames you for everything that has gone wrong in the relationship, dismisses you and moves on, you have to know that some people cannot connect at that level. And it's important to spot these people as soon as possible. And I'm not saying all these people are bad. Some people do have trouble connecting emotionally, and it does take a lot of reflection and work on yourself to connect at a deeper level. Someone who does the work and chooses to be vulnerable, chooses to be humble, doesn't automatically blame others, but looks to themselves as to how they can show up better and how they can take accountability for their role, take responsibility for how they show up. There are people that do the work and get to that point and then have an equal relationship with the person they want to be with. There are people that do that. And then there are those that won't. And it's important to see the signs. What are the signs? Are they taking responsibility? Do they apologize? Do they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you"? If that's not in their vocabulary, that's not in their vocabulary. They're not there to apologize. They are there to make sure that they aren't hurt. They aren't there to make sure that you're not hurt, because you wouldn't be hurt otherwise. You know what happens when I hurt my fiance, Asha? I mean, I don't intentionally hurt her, but things happen. Things are said and they're misunderstood. And sometimes it happens and she might be upset or hurt. And the first thing that comes to my mind, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was a mistake. I'm so sorry. I was just angry and you didn't deserve that. And I take full responsibility. I mean, fortunately, that doesn't happen often. We have a very good relationship. But every now and then there'll be something that is said and that's misunderstood. And she'll say, "Did you really mean that?" And I'll ask her, "What do you mean?" And then we'll have a conversation about it. But that's just it. We'll have a conversation about it. We will have the hard talk. The hard talk is I listen to what she has to say, and it could feel very hard to hear because it's her truth. This is how she perceived what happened. This is what she remembered as to what I said and all that. And then she'll listen to me. That is a good argument. Not really, but it is. It can be an argument that is actually productive. You can have a productive argument. "No, you said this." "No, I didn't. I said this." But a productive argument involves listening. I'm going to stop and listen. I'm not going to interrupt. That's what we do. We practice that. We even talk about it later. And I even told her once, I said, "We have great arguments." And it's helpful to be that way with somebody so that they know that they are being heard and you know you are being heard. And then you both get your points across. And most of the time we're able to get through it. No problem. It's rare that we don't, but we aren't afraid to get into the deep stuff or dive into that. And that's important. And this is what you need to look for in any relationship that you have, where if it's too difficult to have a conversation or even an argument because one of you just won't listen or one of you is pointing the finger all the time and it's all your fault, I do nothing wrong, I'm perfect. If it's that way, then it's not balanced. It's not healthy. And it's not going to get anywhere because someone is so defensive or protective of themselves that they don't want to go there. They don't want to be vulnerable. And Asha and I have had very vulnerable moments. She might cry. I might cry. I will back off. She will back off. She's very good at apologizing later. I take a little longer, but we always do. We get to that point, and that is healthy. If you don't have that with somebody when there is difficulty, it will be challenging to have any progress. Because if you're not talking about this stuff and processing it and getting through it so that it doesn't compound and pile up for later, then it stays. It stays in your system. It stays in your psyche. It's always there in the background, like a thorn, just continuing to push on the back of your brain. Hey, this is still an issue. And then what happens when other issues get in there too? Now you have multiple thorns pushing on the back of your brain. Hey, these are still issues. Guess what? They're going to come up again because we haven't dealt with them. We haven't processed them. And if you're with somebody that doesn't want to go there, doesn't want to talk about it, and tells you, oh, you're just too emotional, I don't want to deal with this, that's on them. That's not your fault. You are probably wide open. Let's talk about this. I'm willing to go there. I'm willing to cry about it. I'm willing to feel very vulnerable with you about this. But they don't want to go there because you're too emotional. And if you're too emotional, then that means that I have to be emotional. And that means that I might have to take responsibility for my emotions. So I don't want to deal with that. And if I took responsibility for my emotions, you might think that I'm to blame and my self-esteem can't take that. So I'm going to push everything that I don't want to deal with onto you so that you have to deal with it because I'm too fragile. You want to know who's too emotional? The person that doesn't want to be vulnerable is too emotional because they can't handle it. So they put that giant wall of protection around their heart so that they don't have to handle it. Because people who haven't processed their emotions and reflected upon what has happened to them in life and what they haven't dealt with yet and what triggers them, their coping mechanisms, what do they do when challenges come along? People who haven't dealt with that kind of stuff, they've got a lot going on inside that they do not want to expose to the world. So what they do is they push everything that they don't want to deal with onto another person. They build this exterior that protects them so that they won't have to be vulnerable and they won't have to feel as deeply as someone who has a healthy connection to their own emotional state. They have a healthy connection to their heart. Somebody who is, quote, too emotional, according to the person who wrote to me, she thinks she might be too emotional. That kind of person is willing to take the chance of having a deep, connected relationship. A person that is called too emotional, too sensitive, they are willing to be vulnerable and have their heart crushed to feel what real love and connection is. That's what I love about people that are, quote, too emotional. They are ready to have the deepest, most connected relationship you can have. And that's a wonderful thing. Don't ever lose that. Everyone has sensitivities. I'm sensitive to sappy movies. I can't get through Ghost without crying. I'm sensitive to grocery store commercials. It just happens. I open my heart. I allow it to happen. That's a normal, sympathetic and empathetic response to real people going through real issues. Or even if you watch a movie, you can relate to those issues. You can connect with those issues. I think people who have that kind of connection are the most grounded and willing to experience a relationship to its fullest, at its deepest level. And so to the person who wrote, no, you're not too emotional. Anybody who says that about you, they are making something up so that they don't have to deal with their own emotions. They don't want to have to admit that they might have something to work on. And so they walk around righteous and feeling good about who they are. I don't know if they feel good, but they aren't changing. They aren't changing how they treat you. They aren't changing how they behave around you. And for the most part, people like that, they lose relationships all the time. I went through 4. And, this is who I used to be. I lost every relationship because I believed I was right, they were wrong, and if they just listened to me, we'd be happy. The terrible, toxic way to be. And some people never change. Some people never heal from that. And they continue destroying relationships, just like this person who wrote, her ex destroyed their relationship by not loving her in a healthy way. To me, love means supporting someone's path to happiness, supporting their decisions, supporting them being the person they want to be. When you have someone in your life that supports you wanting to be you, you have someone special. But if you have someone in your life that supports you only if you are the way they want you, that is not healthy. That is toxic. It is abusive. Or it can be abusive. And so you can't look for your worth, your lovability from anyone else. You can't define yourself through someone else's eyes, especially if they're incapable of loving you in a healthy way. And so let me answer the final question, which I get a lot. I get this question a lot. They asked, how could he just move on so easily? So here's the thing. He would have stayed if you did everything that he wanted you to do. He would have. He would have stayed and made your life miserable. You would have to have had to do everything that he wanted you to do. And unfortunately, it still wouldn't have been good enough, because he would find things to nitpick. He would find things that made you wrong and could blame you for everything that went wrong. What he did the entire time was blame you for his unhappiness, because he was so damn focused on you, on making him happy, that he lost sight of what he really needed in his life. He lost sight of what he really needed to focus on, which was himself. Even when you're in a great relationship, if you're not focused on yourself and you're only focused on the other person changing for you or doing things for you, you can lose sight of who you are, what your values are, what your boundaries are, because you're so focused on the other person. That's one of the first major lessons in Healed Being, the program I run over at healedbeing.com. For those who are difficult in the relationship, who actually want to change and heal, the lesson on focus is so important. The emotionally abusive person always focuses on the other person to change for them. They always want the other person to do things for them, to make them happy, to meet their standards, their sky-high standards. And the victim of emotional abuse can't do it. They can try, they can adapt, they can people please, they can go through all these steps and still never satisfy the person that is continuing to focus on them as the primary reason that the relationship isn't working out, because they don't take responsibility. They don't feel accountable. All they feel is right. I know I'm right. That's what I used to say. I know I'm right. So if she just did what I told her to do, we'd both be happy. But what that meant to her was becoming somebody that she wasn't, lowering her values, lowering her own worth just to meet my expectations. And this happens in abusive relationships. The abuser will cause the victim of that abuse to change who they are, or at least that's what happens. The victim of abuse changes who they are to try and adapt to what the abusive person wants and needs from them. And that continually degrades the other person. It continually puts them in a lower space inside themselves. And eventually, and you may have heard this before, this is how you become a shell of your former self. That slow degradation of who you are is what eats away at you from the inside out. And over time, it gets worse and worse. And I can hear it. I can hear those words. This person who wrote, they're saying that over time, it just got worse and worse. So coming back to that person's question, how could he move on so easily? The answer may not be satisfying. The answer may not give you closure. But the truth is, he did not invest into the relationship as much as you did. He did not want to allow himself to get that close. He kept his distance, because people who choose to feel love and connect with somebody else are going to have a lot more difficult time leaving the relationship, because they're invested. You probably poured your heart and soul into it, and probably even more so trying to make him happy. And because of that, you have a lot invested, and you just can't figure out why it ended because you invested so much, but he wasn't in that same space, and it has nothing to do with you. You were ready to love. You were ready to connect at that deep level, and he couldn't get there. And maybe you saw hints of it. Maybe you saw signs of it. Maybe you saw little things that indicated that he really was a deeper person in some ways and sometimes, but he chose not to get any deeper. And so he kept his distance to help him feel safe inside himself. And he did that by being difficult. He did that by pushing the blame onto you and taking no responsibility. Because the less responsibility and obligation that you have, the less stress you have in your life. And so emotionally abusive people know how to keep stress out of their life. They just push it onto other people. Like I said before, they just push it onto somebody else so that they don't have to deal with it, and you do. And yes, people will get hurt. You got hurt because of someone like this, but that's who he is. And hopefully it's not who he will be from now on. Hopefully he will learn, but I can pretty much guarantee that if he hasn't healed and he's already moved on to the next relationship, that person's going to suffer just as much, if not more. I mean, because when they know they're right, when they feel righteous, when other people have to bow down and submit and meet their sky-high standards, those people can't. You will never, ever be good enough for an emotionally abusive person. I have an episode called that, Love and Abuse. If you look it up at loveandabuse.com, you'll find one that says you will never, ever be good enough for, I think it's an emotionally abusive person, but something like that. And that explains it all. You will never be enough for someone like that. And that's not because of you. It's because of them. They can't connect at that level. And if you don't notice that they can't connect at that deep level, or they pretend to connect, or they do connect, but then they hold back and they shield themselves from the world and from you, and they don't want to expose their own vulnerabilities. They don't want to be humble and admit that when they're wrong or apologize. If they're not doing those things, then they're not going to, unless they reflect and they heal and they work on themselves. They won't. You just have to know that if they're not going there most of the time, they probably won't. And that means, or it can mean, that they're not as invested in the relationship. And it's important for you to know that, so that you know if you should invest any more yourself. Because the more you invest emotionally into a relationship with another person, the more it's going to hurt like hell when it ends. But what ends up happening a lot is that one person may be all in and they just can't see that the other person isn't. And it's important to know that. It's important to see that so that you don't blame yourself later. When everything goes down, or if everything goes badly, you don't blame yourself for them not investing into the relationship. And again, it has nothing to do with how lovable you are, how worthy you are, how amazing you are in every way. It has everything to do with them, because you're going to feel when somebody really loves you. You're going to feel it. You're going to know it. There's no question. There's no confusion. It makes sense. And it feels good, because that's what love and connection is supposed to be about. That's what a romantic relationship is supposed to be about. So never blame yourself for someone else's inability to accept and love you exactly as you are. I hope this helps. Share this with somebody who might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the Mean Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook helps you pinpoint exactly what's going on in your relationship, outlining the behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad. Take the assessment in the workbook and gain clarity on what your next best steps are. After you purchase, you'll get an invite to the peer support group on Facebook. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. And if you've discovered that you are doing hurtful behaviors to someone you care about and you'd like to change that about yourself, sign up for the Healed Being program over at healedbeing.com. You can take the course on your own at your own pace, or join the optional private online group where I and others will give you direct support. That's healedbeing.com. If you're looking for a safer way to listen to this show where all the titles to the episodes are changed, click on the Safe Listening button on the podcast page over at loveandabuse.com. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you're not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant. Because you are. We'll talk again soon.